Hello, my dear brothers and sisters. Welcome to this edition of the History of Christianity Season 2. Today, we're going to start a three-part series in which we're going to look at the three major branches of philosophy that are prevalent during the 17th and 18th centuries in Western Europe and are very influential on Christianity and religious thought at the time. So while we're going to look at three branches, it'll actually be more than 3 weeks because the one we're starting today is going to take 2 weeks to do. So we begin today by looking at the philosophical branch known as the rationalist option. So that means we need to understand what rationalism is. Rationalism, which reached its apex in the 18th and 19th centuries, was characterized by its interest in the world and by its confidence in the powers of reason. In Western Europe, there had been a growing interest in the world of nature since the 13th century. So this one is actually going back some ways from where we're at now. We're looking at what's going on during the 17th and 18th centuries, but this has been a growing trend that started in the 13th century, so several hundred years before that. At this time, Thomas Aquinas reintroduced Aristotelian philosophy as a fundamental tool for theology. Remember that in many ways, the most influential of the Greek thinkers on Christianity, even from early on, was Plato. But Thomas Aquinas brought back Aristotle into the equation, who had kind of been rejected. So with that, there's going to be some different thinking at the time. This new philosophy emphasized the importance of sense perception. So not just reason and what's going on in your mind, but also what's happening in the natural world. So this is going to be a shift, and you'll see some of the things that we talk about today. You can probably see even in our own modern perception of what spirituality is and how we practice our understanding of who God is and how he relates to us, definitely influenced by this. This meant that the observation of the world could lead to significant knowledge. Therefore, there came to be a growing interest in the world of nature. And we can look back at the science that's going on at this time, 17th and 18th centuries. There's a lot going out about trying to discover the truths of nature and how things came to be and a lot of other things like that. And it's really an outcome of this desire to know more about the natural world. By the 17th century, many thought that the goal of reason was the understanding of nature. At the same time, there grew a confidence in the powers of reason. So both things are happening. You have a more and more curiosity and a desire to understand exactly how nature works, but then also the ability to be able to understand these things, the powers of reason, to be able to get to answers in a scientific way by observation of the natural world. These two things are going to kind of mix together and really be important in this idea of rationalism. Often these two elements were combined in an effort to show the degree to which the order of nature coincides with the order of reason. So that's what we're going to see in this rationalist option. So who are some of the more important philosophers when you look at rationalism? I guarantee you're going to recognize some of these names for sure. These various tendencies led to the philosophy of René Descartes. He lived from 1596 to 1650. Surely you've heard of Descartes. You may not be able to write a paper on him just off of memory, but the name I'm sure probably rings a bell. His philosophical system was based on a great confidence in mathematical reasoning, joined to a profound distrust of all that is not absolutely certain. He was a guy who he didn't want there to be any question about whether something was true or not. He wanted it to be absolutely certain that it was true, and he went to great pains to do that. This meant that Descartes felt he should begin with an attitude of universal doubt. So the way to establish what is in fact true beyond any doubt is to start with doubt. Question everything. Don't take it for granted that anything's true. And you'll see that it gets to even absurd levels with this. I mean, he was dedicated to it right down to even questioning your own very existence. And that's going to lead to one of the more famous statements that philosophers have ever made that people remember. And I guarantee you, again, unless you've just been living under a rock your whole life, you've heard this one before. You'll know it as soon as I say it. In this way, he could be absolutely certain that once he found something that could not be doubted, it must be true. From the outside looking in, you look at it and say, well, that's obvious. But that's not the way that people had thought up until this time, largely. And so he's kind of just stripping everything down to the very bare essentials and starting from scratch on how do you really determine what is real, what is true. And his thinking, the reason for this was not necessarily that he wanted to doubt everything. The reason for it was he wanted to believe in what was true, but he wanted to not have any question about what was true. And if you doubt everything, then what you finally end up believing, you can be very sure and very sound about. So you can understand the thinking here for sure. It's a person who has dedicated their life to pursuing what really is correct and true. He then found that undeniable first truth in his own existence. Doubting everything proved that the doubting subject existed. You have to be careful with these philosophers because they can give you a headache real quick. Trying to follow the logic. I mean, it's there, but sometimes it takes some really paying attention and thinking about things to get to where they're at. But it makes sense. Again, it's so basic, but he's wanting to get to the truth and he's building. So the very first building block is your own existence. And how can you prove that you exist? Well, his thinking on it was, if you have the capacity to doubt, if there's something that's doubting, then that proves that the doubting subject must exist, or else there wouldn't be doubt. You can think about doubt. So you think, okay, well, he's just proven that he himself exists. Yes and no. You'll see. And here's the one that I'm sure that you've heard before. I think, therefore I am became the starting point for this philosophy. So if you don't know anything about philosophy, if you don't know anything about Descartes, if you don't know anything about rationalism, I'm sure you've heard this phrase, I think, therefore I am. And that was from him. That's where he got this, was the idea that if I'm able to think it, if I'm having these questions, then that means I must exist. So at least I can start with that. If I didn't exist, then these questions wouldn't exist because there'd be nobody to think them. So, it makes sense. But again, do you really have to go that far back? Well, he did. He wanted to. But here's the twist on this, though. But the I, and I think, therefore I am, whose existence could not be doubted, is only the philosopher as a thinking thing. Again, here comes headache time. So he said, oh, wait a minute. I can prove that there's a mind, there's something thinking. There's a thinking mechanism. But that's just your mind. That doesn't prove that the rest of you exists. So he said the existence of his body had not yet been proven and must still be doubted. So again, it seems really weird to think that way. Well, I think, therefore I am proves that there's a mind out there somewhere thinking, but that doesn't mean that this body I perceive exists. Well, he had to go to these extremes, and Descartes was determined to do it, and that's what he did. Before proving the existence of his own body, however, Descartes felt he could prove the existence of God. So he wanted to start there after he proved that the whatever it is that's thinking is real, So you got that, and then let's go to God. And that's going to bring us to the brand of rationalism that is associated with Descartes, and that's Cartesian rationalism. Descartes was a profoundly religious man who wanted his philosophy to be useful to theologians. So this wasn't a guy trying to disprove religion. He was trying to prove it. He believed in it, but he wanted to be certain. He wanted to have a way that everybody could be certain about it. So he had his heart in the right place. However, not all agreed with him on this matter. So his way of thinking about it, some people didn't like that. Descartes' philosophy on this matter became known as Cartesianism. So this is what's associated with his thinking, the brand of rationalism that originated with Descartes. The universal doubt which Descartes proposed as his starting point seemed to some no different than crass skepticism. This is one of the things they didn't like about it. It just, why you have to doubt everything? Why do we have to go through this rigmarole of proving my body exists? There's a lot of things that people just at that time took for granted. And I mean, I do too. I've never thought about let me prove my body is real. I feel it aches and pains and moans and groans, and some of you probably understand what I'm talking about. I mean, it seems plenty real to me. But again, that's where he was going with. So to start at that point for some turned people off right away. They didn't want to start with a point of doubting everything about their faith in order to prove it. They said, hey, there's, some of this we don't, this is just being skeptical for the point of being skeptical. And you can agree or disagree with that, but that's not the way Descartes looked at it. There were even those who declared that Cartesianism would lead to heresy. So here we go. The H word gets thrown around again. You don't like what somebody thinks. Well, you may be a heretic. And I mean, that's not to say that some of these philosophies couldn't do that. And in the right hands, almost anything could lead to wrong thinking and even heretical teaching. Even things that we are very strong in our belief system, if it's not understood in the right way, contextually, the way God intended, it can lead to that. And so, to one side you could say, well, yeah, that's true. But on the other side, why do you have to go there, though? Why do you start by just throwing heresy out? Can't we just disagree about things and move on? No, let me throw this word out there. So Descartes didn't enjoy that. This dismayed Descartes to the point that he decided to leave his native France and live the rest of his days in Sweden at the invitation of the Queen. It was the invitation of the Queen of Sweden, not the invitation of the Queen of France. She didn't invite him to leave. No, the Queen of Sweden said, hey, come on over here with us. We appreciate you. And Descartes said, you know what? I think I'll just take you up on that because I don't enjoy being called a heretic. Here I am trying to help people understand and have a stronger faith because they can rationalize it or reason it out, and I'm getting thrown to the wolves here. People are doubting me and they don't like me, so I'm gonna run on off to Sweden. And he did, and that's where he lived the rest of his life. He didn't go back to France to live after that. But there were also those who saw in Cartesianism the promise of theological renewal. So he definitely had those that liked his thinking as well. The main point at which Cartesianism led to further theological and philosophical developments was the question of the relationship between spirit and matter. And remember, this was one of the first and early questions right off the bat in Christianity that became an issue because of the Gnostics. The Gnostics believed that matter was evil, so they didn't think that anything physical could have any relationship to God. And even our own physical beings, in their thought, we are imprisoned in these bodies of flesh that are ultimately bad. And the goal of Christianity and of God is to get us out of them. Was very different. That's very different thinking than what Scripture has taught. And especially, in the Old Testament, the person is looked at as a living soul. That's mind and body all together, not two different things. It's one. But we're very influenced by that thinking as well. And I think in some ways we do kind of carry that on still, thinking about ourselves as being a spirit that's housed in a body. We might not look at it as like being in a prison, but we're looking at it as like the real me is not this flesh that I'm living in. It's the spirit that's within me. My thing, I disagree with that. In eternity, we're going to have a body. You're not going to be just a spirit floating around. There may be a period of time in which you exist that way, depending on if you are alive when Jesus Christ returns to this earth. If you die before that, you go on to be with him, but your body stays behind. So yeah, in that sense, you'd be separated, but it's not meant to be that way. We're going to get our bodies back. So, even saying somebody's laid in the grave, well, that person's really not there. Well, yeah, in one sense, but part of them is there. It's not the conscious part, the spirit or whatever, however you want to put that, the intellect, the mind, that spiritual being does go to spend time with God in the interim between now or when that person died and the return of Jesus Christ. So yeah, that's true, but the body's not unimportant. So so those questions, what my point is, those questions have been around as long as Christianity's been around, and even before that. And that's the point now that they don't feel like Descartes was able to really answer, and it's going to lead to some other answers for it. Descartes affirmed that humans consist of two parts, one that thinks and one that occupies space. So it's just the same idea as the soul and the body. You got a soul that's the thinking part of a person, and then you got the body that's the physical part of a person. This was perfectly acceptable to the orthodoxy of his time. And so, yeah, they all agreed with that. The problem was that Descartes had been unable to offer a satisfactory explanation of the manner in which these two relate. So he never really got to that point. He opened a door to a question he couldn't fully answer. And so that was just fuel to the fire for his critics. Well, look at, that's great to ask all these questions, Descartes, but where's the answers for them? Well, in this particular case, he really didn't have a good answer. So some other people had to come in and fill the gaps here. When the mind thinks, how are its decisions communicated to the body? When something affects the body, how is this communicated to the soul? So questions, again, very philosophical. If you get to thinking about these things too hard, it can make your brain hurt. And, ultimately, are there really any true answers to these questions anyway? I don't know that there are. I mean, I'm not saying there's not a way this happens, but I don't know that as human beings we'll ever get to it. Maybe in eternity we'll understand these things better. But it's what humans have thought about, to a certain extent. And probably all human societies have had some of these questions. They may not have delved into it to this point. In fact, they probably didn't. But it's basic human questions and answers, and they're answers that the belief in God and Scripture should be able to fill in. But it doesn't get specific about every single issue. The Bible doesn't. It has an answer for how to live life in every case, but it doesn't have an answer for every single question. So, people are going to ask these questions. They're going to try to get answers for them. And here we see this. And so there were three main solutions that were offered to try to help Descartes out with the fact that he couldn't answer that question. The first is occasionalism. Occasionalism held that the body and soul do not communicate directly, but only by divine intervention. So as God's in the process, he's the one that allows the body and the soul to communicate together. It is God who moves the body on occasion of the soul's decision, and the soul on occasion of the body's feelings and requirements. So it's not your mind telling your body to do something. It's your mind telling God and God making it happen. And vice versa. It's not your body communicating to your mind, here's how I feel, oh, that hurts, whatever it may be. God's behind the scenes doing all this. But this position was not generally accepted because it seemed to blame God for all events and thoughts. So if God's the one if we're so much basically not puppets, because you still do have independent thought, but you're completely relying on God for everything, then he's kind of responsible for everything. And that's not something people wanted to go with, because there's a lot of bad stuff that happens. And to put God as the one that's the cause for all those things was not going to be a good answer for people. So they largely rejected this option. Monism was held by the Dutch Jew Benedictus of Spinoza. He solved the problem of the communication of soul and body by denying that there is more than one substance. So this is the second solution that was offered, monism. And this is a Dutch guy. He wasn't a Christian, he was a Jew, but he definitely understood the scriptures. And he had a very Jewish thinking about this. Remember, I said in the Old Testament scripture and Jewish philosophy and Jewish understanding of religion, their belief systems and what they felt like the scripture was teaching is that the body, you are a living soul. The soul isn't just a spirit inside of you, it's all of you. And even if you talk of terms, I have a spirit, I have a body, that's still just one thing. It's not two distinct things. It's one thing. And so it's not any real surprise that he felt this way. This was the way that, he had really gotten as a Jew. But he's going to now take that and make a philosophy based on his monism. Thought and physical extension are not different substances, but two attributes of a single substance. So just one thing. So if you only have one thing, you don't have to figure out how they communicate. There is just one thing. It's communicate. There's no communicating involved. It's just one. It's one being doing something. The same may be said about God and the world. There are merely different attributes of the one substance, which is the universe. These doctrines found little support among Orthodox Christians, or no wonder he went too far with it. I like the idea about the living being just being one thing, but this stuff about God, that God's just kind of everything, and there's just one substance. The universe is just made up of God, and it just gets way off track. To me, I don't see the sense of going that far with it, but that's what he did, and ultimately that led to he had to throw it out because you can't go with that as Christians. So what I feel like probably of these three solutions is the best one got derailed because it went too far and started making making God try to fit into the same box that people do, and that doesn't really work out. So that's two of them. Now there's a third one as well. Finally, German philosopher and mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz suggested pre-established harmony. This philosophy began with the existence of an infinite number of substances absolutely independent from each other, which he called monads. So he's going to look at there being a distinction, but that everything is separated into an infinite number of substances. So let's go along with what he's going to say. These monads have no windows, that is, cannot communicate with each other, nor does God make them communicate. So the different parts of a person, they don't communicate together, and God's not behind the scenes trying to make them communicate. Rather, from the very beginning, God has created these monads so that they may act in seeming independence. The manner in which soul and body communicate is very similar to that in which various clocks in a shop communicate among themselves. They do not. So what Leibniz is saying is your mind and your body, your soul and your body don't communicate together. There's not a communication. So there's no problem with any of this. It doesn't happen. God just created both of them to function in a particular way so that they didn't need to communicate. So it goes back again to God. It goes back to God being the one that's behind the scenes, and that's going to issue into a problem. Rather, they all work according to the pre-established order set by the clockmaker. This solution was rejected because it seemed to imply that God had foreordained all things, both good and evil, and that there was no such thing as human freedom. So occasionalism took it kind of down that road, but not as far as this. This one, it seems like God did everything. People didn't have any choices about nothing. And so any bad thing that ever happened is on God for that. He did it. He's the one who's doing it all. And if he didn't directly do it, he made it to where people would have to do it. So it's on him anyway. So yeah, this one isn't going to go, it's not going to fly. It got rejected pretty quickly too, because it just went in a direction that was out of line. But, you take that philosophy to its logical conclusion, that's what you're going to come up with. So we'll step away from the thinking that's going on in Western Europe at the time, and particularly with the followers of Descartes. And we're going to move now to the next one, and that's going to be empiricism. It's going to be taking place in Great Britain. Meanwhile, in Great Britain, philosophy was following a different route, empiricism. Empiricism, from a Greek word meaning experience, found its leading figure in Oxford professor John Locke. Now, if you know anything about the founding of our country, then you probably heard the name John Locke before. He had read the works of Descartes and agreed that the order of the world corresponded to the order of the mind. But he did not agree that there were innate ideas that one could discover by looking into oneself. He's going to much more be looking at outside. Instead, he held that all knowledge derived from experience, both the outer experience of the senses and the inner experience by which we know ourselves and the functioning of our mind. So he's going to be very, very strong on experiential knowledge, what you learn from, what you observe, how the world is, and even from your own inner self. It's going to be about experience, not just that you have a rational mind that's just going to derive these things in and of itself. This means that the only true knowledge is that which is based on our three levels of experience: our own selves, those outer realities that are presently before us, and God, whose existence is proven at each moment by the existence of the self and its experiences. Apart from these three, there is no certain knowledge. So for Locke, there's only three ways you can get true knowledge. You can get it through our own selves, through three levels of experience. So the experience of just our own selves, the experience of interacting with outer realities that are presently before us, and then God, who he says the fact of our own existence proves that there's a God. So anything else, it's not certain knowledge. Doesn't mean that it couldn't be true, doesn't mean that you discard it, but you can't put it in the certain knowledge category. But there is another level of knowledge, that of probability, which plays an important role in human life. At this level, we do not apply the strict proofs of reason, but those of judgment. So he says, okay, that's how you can know things for certain, but there are also some things that you're not going to know for certain, but they're still important, and you can still evaluate them in a way to help you have confidence about whether you believe in them or not. Judgment allows us to surmise that since we have repeatedly experienced another person's existence, it is probable that the person continues to exist even when not before us. So You have a friend that moves away. You've spent a lot of time with them. You have been around long enough to be able to be very sure that they exist. That's the certain knowledge category. But the assumption would be that they would continue to exist. And that's a safe judgment to make. Even you can't say for sure because you're not with them, but because you have been around them a lot, you don't think their existence is in question, that they're just going to poof out of thin air. So you can make a judgment. It's not on the level of certain knowledge, but it's still strong because you've had enough experience with that person in an area that is sure and certain knowledge that you can make that judgment. And Locke's thinking on this is we do this all the time. We don't even think about it. We do it. Judgment, while not absolutely certain, is necessary. It is on its basis that we conduct most of our affairs in life. In other words, there's very few things that we can absolutely 100% be certain about. That's Descartes wouldn't like that. But Locke is saying, well, that's the way it is. You live that way. Now, but you still make judgments, and it's okay to make a judgment. It may not be in the 100%, no doubt about it, it's certain fact, but it can still be reasonable. And after all, that's the way we have to live life. There's no real way to do without that. What else does this say? Faith is assent to knowledge and is derived from revelation rather than from reason. So he's going to get into some territory that religious people and Christians aren't going to like. Therefore, its knowledge, though highly probable, is not certain. It's never certain. So what he's saying is faith can't be in that category of certain. It's because we have to be. We can't experience all of this on our own. We have to have God show us these things to be true. And there are some things that we'll never know with our own eyes on this side of eternity anyway. And we take them as true, not in the certain knowledge category, but we can make a judgment about it. So even if we say it's very likely it's true, we can't say with 100% certainty it is. Obviously, there's going to be people in the religious world that is not going to like that. They're not going to believe it, and they're not going to agree with it. Reason and judgment must be used to measure the degree of probability of what we are asked to believe by faith. So you use those same skills, reason and judgment, to be able to verify it. Yes, I'm being asked to take this by faith, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to just jump blindly in a dark hole. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to reason it out. I'm going to use the skills I have to make a good decision about what I believe. For this reason, Locke opposed the belief of those who think that all they say is based on divine revelation, because you couldn't be certain about any of it otherwise. For the same reason, he promoted religious tolerance. And tolerance comes when one confuses the probable judgments of faith with the certainty of empirical reason. So what Locke is saying is, if you 100% say that any other religion other than the one you believe could not be right, then you're not really being honest, because you can't know that for sure. Even if you're 99% sure, there's still 1% chance you're wrong. And as long as that 1% chance exists, you've got to be tolerant and let other people have their religious beliefs, because after all, they might end up being right. And he actually has a good point about that. In 1695, Locke published a treatise, The Reasonableness of Christianity, in which he claimed Christianity is the most reasonable of religions. So he liked Christianity, he wasn't against it. He just said you had to be tolerant of others. And even within the Christianity itself, probably more of that than anything else, you have to be tolerant of other people's beliefs within Christianity, because we don't know all that stuff either. And he has actually got a good point on that. According to him, the core of Christianity is the existence of God and faith in Christ as the Messiah. But Locke did not believe that Christianity had added anything of importance to what could have been known through the proper use of reason and judgment. This is where I'd have to part ways with Locke. I don't agree with this. There are elements of Christianity that you can't get to just by your own reason and what you see in the world and experience. They have to be spiritually discerned from God. That's the way that it is. He didn't believe that, but I disagree with that. In the final analysis, Christianity is little more than a very clear expression of truths and laws that others could have known by their natural faculties. Now, before we get too hard on Locke, let's remember that Paul did say that the natural world reveals enough about God so that people don't have an excuse that don't believe in him. So there is a certain level that you can get to in belief and understanding that does have to do with experience in our own world and experience in your life. But Paul didn't claim this, and I guess Locke is thinking this way, but you can't get all the way there. You get to a level where at least you can't have an excuse when you say, well, I didn't know these things were true. Well, no, the very existence that we have, reality itself screams out that there's a God, there's a designer of all we see. But that still doesn't get you all the way there. So, there's a problem with this. You can take it so far, but then Locke takes it to a level that I wouldn't agree with, and most Christians wouldn't agree with. That leaves us with just one more we're going to go through quickly. This is deism. Locke's opinions regarding religion reflected a growing trend at the time. Tired of the endless squabbles among the partisans of many sects and movements, many sought an understanding of religion that went beyond orthodoxy. And we're still getting the reverberations from this in our day and time. People got fed up with the way the church was conducting itself and the way Christians conducted themselves. And listen, rightly so. As we've gone through this study, you've heard particular weeks of disgust in my own voice when I deal with talking about some of this stuff, because it's absolutely ridiculous way people were treating each other. And it did not reflect any kind of relationship with Jesus Christ whatsoever. And I can understand the people that just finally said, you know what, if this is what it is, then I don't really need it. And that's where we as Christians have messed up in a lot of ways. We can't go back and fix that now. That's already out. But we have to understand that it's not just that the world's gone crazy. We kind of helped them along the way. A common alternative was that of the deists. They were called deists or free thinkers. Deists because they rejected what they considered the aberrations of the atheists, and free thinkers in contrast to those who held to the narrow limits of orthodoxy. So they're kind of in between. They're not atheists. They certainly are not saying that there's not a God, but they're also not going to be in a dogmatic sect. They're not going to pick one side and go with them. They're going to take a middle ground approach. The first great figure of deism, Lord Herbert of Cherbury, held that true religion must be universal, not only in the sense of calling for the allegiance of all, but also in the sense of being a religion that is natural to all humankind. So he said anything that is in religion that everybody doesn't agree on, then you can kind of throw that out. We ought to all be able to agree on things. If we're going to be fighting about all this other stuff, then the best thing to do would be to just say it's probably not right. Otherwise, people would agree on it. So, he ain't going to be all that popular with the mainline Orthodox Christians. Such religion is based on the natural instincts of every human being. So, you got that same idea, can we all get there on our own? I don't believe so. I don't think the Bible teaches that, but these guys thought that you could. Deism had 5 basic doctrines, and these are not bad. The existence of God, the obligation to worship God, the ethical requirements of such worship, the need for repentance, and reward and punishment, both in this life and the one to follow. Any Christian would agree with those. I don't think anybody would have a problem with those. Deism held that whatever there is of value in Christianity coincides with natural religion. So it's going to go more towards this universal religion idea, and anything in Christianity that goes along with that is good. Anything that doesn't go along with it is bad. You throw it out. So a big problem, and people in our own day and time are trying to do that too, by the way. Deism fought on 2 fronts. On the one hand, it opposed the narrow dogmatism that had taken hold of most branches of Christianity. On the other, it tried to refute the easy skepticism of those who simply abandon religion. So again, it's 2 fronts, but it's kind of a middle ground approach between the two. But many Christians were uneasy with the manner in which deism tended to discount the significance of particular historical events in Revelation, for this discounted the significance of Jesus Christ. They didn't hold a whole lot of credit for Jesus and what he did in his historical context. That gets away from the universal ideas of religion, so that wasn't going to fly with Christians. Eventually, the most devastating criticism of deism came from a Scottish philosopher who showed that reason was not as reasonable as deists and other rationalists believed. His name was David Hume. So this was a long chapter on rationalism, and so I broke it up into 2. We would have gone well over an hour trying to do both of these. So we're going to stop right there. Next week, we'll jump into the rest of this study on this particular branch of philosophy rationalism. We're going to start that by looking at David Hume, but we're going to have some other ones to look at too. So thanks for being with me again today. Hope that you have a wonderful and blessed rest of your week, and God bless.